Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Stacy Bostjanick, the Chief of Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity and Deputy CIO for Cybersecurity at the Defense Department, and Jen Henderson, the Senior Cybersecurity Policy Analyst at the Defense Contract Management Agency. Thank you both so much for joining me today. Obviously, this is the Risk and Compliance Exchange, so we could not have a feature on the not have a feature on the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program, or CMMC, as it's well known. And Stacy, I'd love if you could just kind of help set the table for us here. Obviously, DoD has been putting this program in place for a long time, and it's taken several evolutions and
Iteration.
iterations. Yeah. Can you explain the motivation, though, behind kind of what's driving DoD to put in place the certification program for cybersecurity?
Sure. So I'll give you a little bit of history. I'm going to go quickly so because we don't have a ton of time, right? So we put the 252, 204, 7012 contract clause protection of controlled unclassified information in people's contracts starting in about 2016. By 2017, if you handled controlled unclassified information, you had a requirement to comply with the NIST 800-171 requirements that were predicated in that clause. That clause also has a requirement for incident reporting and things of that nature to protect controlled unclassified information that is shared with the DIB. In about 2018, 2019, the DoD IG and the Navy Cyber Readiness Review uncovered that companies really weren't being compliant, right? So at that point in time, Secretary Shanahan said, "Hey, we got to get on top of this. We got to figure out that the companies that we're doing business with are doing the things we ask them to do." So as a result, we began looking at ways that we could validate that companies were compliant with the NIST 800-171 that they signed up to do when they accepted that clause in their contract. So initially, we used the DCMA, we established the DCMA DIBCAC team to start doing compliance reviews of different companies. We quickly recognized with 220 to 300,000 companies in the DIB, it wasn't plausible for us to be able to resource that team enough to be able to cover down in a 3-year period all 300,000 companies. And that's why we started to look for ways to be able to meet the need and meet the validation of these requirements using third-party industry partners. We looked at the FedRAMP program and we modeled a lot of our activity off of the way FedRAMP handles its certification process, understanding that the CMMC process was going to be far bigger, right? So we started out in 2019. I think Mr. Fahey announced CMMC, and we began with the model, the cybersecurity maturity model that had 130 requirements, the 110 from the NIST 800-171. And then we had developed an additional 20 that brought more of the maturity into the model. We went out in the 48 CFR. Originally, we felt like we could just implement this through a DFARS clause with the 48 CFR requirement. And we put that out, and we were granted an interim rule, which is a big present from OMB OIRA, because when you get an interim rule, you can start implementing before you have to answer all the public comments on the rule. So what happened was that coincided with the end of the Trump administration and the beginning of the Biden administration. We received about 750 comments on that 48 CFR rule, and the Biden administration said, let's take a strategic pause and reevaluate the rule to ensure it's doing exactly what we want it to do, it's meeting our requirements, and it's not overly onerous on the DIB. So we stood up a Tiger team that had a member from the DCMA DIBCAC, Mr. John Ellis, which he has since quit federal service, and we miss him every day. So if he's listening to this, we want him back as much as we possibly could. and members from the CIO and then another member from policy re-looked at the program and came up with several recommendations. And then we had an executive steering group with members from all over the Department of DoD to meet and decide on those recommendations. So as a result, we decided that not adding 20 more requirements was a bridge too far, that companies were already struggling with the 110, that we would stick to the 110. Instead of having 5 levels of progression in the CMMC model, we would shorten it to 3 to make it more succinct and easier. And we changed the CMMC level 1, which is the 15 requirements out of the FAR. Originally, we said that would have to have a certification. We broke that back and said, no, that'll just be a self-assessments in the SPURS database with an annual reaffirmation that you're compliant. And then CMMC level 2, we bifurcated it and said, okay, some CUI is not that important to the department. An example would be historic geological data would be one of the categories of CUI that we may not necessarily require you to get a third-party assessment for. You could probably still do a self-assessment. So there will be some that will be able to just do a self-assessment, but they'll have to do that affirmation just like everybody else annually, which will give the department more of an ability to go after those companies that are being disingenuous in their assessment for false claims, right? So that kind of gives us a hook to hold them accountable for that, but not require them to have to go out and get that third-party assessment. And then we did the third-party assessment for the CMMC level 2 area, and then the DIBCAC team that Jen works with down at DCMA will be the representatives from the government that will come do the Delta assessment from level 2 to level 3. So if you're a company that wants to be level 3 certified, you'll have to go out and get a third-party assessment and get the compliance with the level 2. And then the DIBCAC will come in and do the Delta from level 2 to level 3. There'll be some things in that level 2 that they will validate while they're in there doing the level 3, but it won't be a whole nother redo of the level 2. They're going to do take from the level 2 and move to the level 3. And so, you know, we did that to simplify it, make it easier and more affordable for our DIB contractors. We are also supportive. There's a tax incentive that's going through the Congress now. We're hoping it goes through, and we're supportive of that. So companies that are less than 50 people that get certification will be able to get some sort of tax break. So we're trying to find any means possible to help alleviate some of the pain and struggle for our small businesses. We also have several pilots ongoing today for a cloud environment that would be totally CMMC compliant, that we could invite contractors to operate in, that they wouldn't have to have the CUI on their systems, which would alleviate some of the pressure and concerns about meeting CMMC compliance. I said a lot there. Did I answer your question, though?
You absolutely did. That was fantastic. That got us up to speed and some interesting things to follow up on there. But and so to get us up to date here on where we are today, we have a CMMC program rule that is now final, goes into effect in mid-December, and then we also have a proposed acquisition rule that is the other shoe that needs to drop and get finalized next year, correct?
Now, what that means is we anticipate the CMMC program rule going into effect 16 December. So C3 PAOs can now start performing assessments on their own. Heretofore, they had been doing it in conjunction with DCMA DIBCAC and doing a joint surveillance assessment. But now, as of 16 December, God willing, nothing happens to our rule. It gets through the congressional review and becomes effective on the 16th of December, then companies can start working with they can start working now, but those assessments can begin. Now, the good news is for companies, right? So we anticipate the 48 CFR, which will be the mechanism to be a contractual requirement, right? Because 48 governs the DFARS. That we think will go into effect late spring, early summer of 2025. So you got probably 5 to 6 months of runway to start getting your certifications and working with C3 PAOs to get lined up to get your certification if you feel you are ready. Now, if you're a company that has enjoyed a joint surveillance assessment and you met your 110 requirements, those on December 16th will be converted to a CMMC Level 2 certification, and they will be 3 years from the date that you got that assessment. So they'll be good for 3 years from the date that that 110 was achieved. And so you'll already be ready and able to compete on contracts that have a CMMC Level 2 requirement from the get-go. Right. And then the rest of you, if you looked at the rule, and I'm sure everybody has read the 438-page rule and has it all digested. And so I don't need to regurgitate a ton of stuff here and bore people, but there's a 4-phased rollout approach, right? The first year, we anticipate still having that self-assessment being acceptable with the annual affirmations, right? And then in year 2, we'll start seeing more contracts with the CMMC Level 2 certification. It will be decided on by the program manager and the sensitivity or prioritization of that topic that they're going to put their contracts out for, that where you'll see your CMMC Level 2 certification. And then I believe in year 3, it'll be more standard that it'll go into more contracts for the Level 2, and we'll start implementing the Level 3 CMMC. You'll start seeing contracts with that. And then by year 4, we expect all contracts will have that CMMC requirement in it, either at the 1, 2, or 3 level. Right now, when you flow your information down, primes are going to have to know the certification level of the subs that they're handing information to. So if you have a CUI requirement that is governed by a CMMC Level 2 certification and you want to pass that to your sub, he must meet the CMMC Level 2 certification requirement to receive and have that information on their systems.
All right. All right. That's a lot of great information there. I hope folks have been taking some notes. Jen, I want to bring you into this. The Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, the DIBCAC, as Stacy noted, has a role in this program and has been working on evaluating contractor cybersecurity even before CMMC takes effect. Can you just talk a little bit about what DIBCAC is doing and what it's learned about the readiness of defense contractors to kind of meet these requirements?
Sure, absolutely. Good morning. And yes, the DIBCAC has actually been, like Ms. Bostjanick just said, we've actually been operational since 2019, with the first pilot assessments being June of that year. And moving on after that to be a fully operational capability, we performed hundreds of assessments over the last 5 years. And we have been conducting those against the NIST SP 800-171 Revision 2, which is also what the CMMC rule is based off of as well. And we do all of the cyber assessments of the unclassified systems for the contractors that protect CUI. So basically the same structure. It's just what is currently in place right now as CMMC is rolling out and will be implemented. So the primary takeaway here is that it's based on DoD priorities, right? A lot of people get that confused. How do you get, when we call them and they say, how did you get my information? Why, as a defense contractor, are you reaching out to me to conduct this assessment? And the most important thing is it's based on DoD priorities. And we have a whole schema based on dollar value spend, the programs, just different things, leadership requests. And that is how we actually reach out. We've been doing lots of information gathering, both with DoD CIO and with ANS and RNE, also with policy as well. And this is how we inform our assessment schedule. Now, things will change a little bit as we move on into CMMC. It will no longer be the straight NIST SP 800-171 DoD assessments. as we have a large role within the CMMC program as well. So your second question was also based on what have we seen as far as the readiness of the DIB. And I think that's changed over time. Now, keep in mind, when we first started, both with that pilot and then for the first couple of years, I would say we were doing a lot of the very large defense contractors, right? And their resources and their ability to meet the requirements are greater than typically very, very tiny organizations that may not have those resources. And that's what Ms. Bostjanick was addressing with the different options that are being piloted or being considered right now to help those small and medium businesses. So the top 10 other than satisfied requirements, and other than satisfied is the term that is used in the NIST SP 800-171 for basically the security requirements that are not satisfied, that are not met. And so we call it the top 10 OTS, and we get asked about this with every presentation that we're ever asked. Can you give us the top 10 OTS? Can you update the top 10 OTS? And while that changes throughout the years based on really the size of the DIB and the readiness, right? Some things just do not change. We have some of the greatest hits of the security requirements that are continually struggled on by the defense contractors, and that would be, most people can guess, that's 3.13.11, which is FIPS validated cryptography. That's the big banger here. And this has been persistent from the beginning and really could be a result of different things, such as companies not understanding the requirements or some using other types of encryption mechanisms that just isn't FIPS validated, or delays in the FIPS process itself. And another one of the greatest hits of the failed or the other than satisfied requirement that has been a consistent problem for the DIB has been 3.5.3, which is multi-factor authentication, the other big one. Again, there's a variety of reasons as to why this continues to be an issue, from misunderstanding or not even having complete implementation. They've implemented it in some places, but not entirely across all systems that are required to have it. So as the DIBCAC has been assessing smaller and smaller organizations, the data shows that there's no longer a consistent top 10 other than satisfied security requirements. They are spread out more as the organizations may find it more difficult to understand the requirements in general, or may not have the resources or the expertise to be able to understand or employ these requirements.
Yeah, that's a really interesting finding. And obviously, so much of the conversation around the CMMC program requirements has been the impact on small and medium-sized businesses. There's no consistent kind of like set of requirements that they're not hitting. So what are some of the remediation steps? What are we finding as far as what these companies can do to go from that initial assessment where it's like, whoa, we're not hitting a lot of these, to getting to a point where maybe they could bridge that gap? Are there any initial thoughts there from your assessments?
I think education is key. We are making sure that we engage. We do lots of engagements with DoD CIO. We also are making sure that we are discussing openly in industry events. And we do intend to share a lot of our training on our forward-facing website, but there is also a lot of information that just is out there, especially since CMMC is the hot topic now. So compliance with the NIST SP 800-171, it's not a new requirement. And I think Ms. Bostjanick hit that really well at the first part of this discussion. Was this has been a requirement since way back in 2016. So our biggest endeavor for getting these small and medium businesses up to speed is that engagement through those industry groups. And there's many ways for them to get that information and to get engaged with us early and often. And the other thing that Ms. Bostjanick, I would like to turn it right on over to her, is exactly what she was saying before. about those small business initiatives, such as that cloud pilot through the Office of Small Business Programs, and also those other tax incentives that could potentially help alleviate the resource constraints.
Yeah, and we also have DC3 and the NSA Cyber Collaboration Centers have free offerings with different kinds of capabilities and tools that will assist companies in meeting some of the requirements of the CMMC. The DC3 has a CRA review that they're actually updating now to make sure it aligns directly with the 171 and the CMMC requirements. That'll be they'll sit down with you, they'll walk you through the assessment and talk to you and give you ideas of things. Now, the difficulty for us in the government is we can't tell a company, oh, just go get this product and turn these levers on and you're good to go, right? Because we can't endorse a particular product. What we can do is point them in the right direction to have some people that'll walk them through it and talk them through, do you want this or do you want that? And you know, what is the best fit for you? The Cyber AB also has a cadre of people who have been trained on CMMC that can consult. There are other consultants out in industry that haven't been trained that still can meet the need as well. I'm not saying you have to be from the Cyber AB, but you know, I think for companies that are looking for assistance, make sure you understand who you're working with and what their credentials are, so you don't get somebody that's just charging you money and isn't really going to get you there. And if somebody tells you, we can meet with you for a week and we can get you CMMC by the end of the second week, that's probably a little bit of a snake oil salesman there, because you know, what we've heard resoundingly from our DIB partners is it's not an overnight thing. And you know, one of the frustrations for the department is roughly we have recorded 450 cyber incidents a year. I think in 2021, it went up higher during COVID and it came back down a little bit, but we've been pretty consistent and we're on track this year to beat our last year record and have more incidents, which is not the record we want to beat, right? We don't want to be going in that direction. And when you look at that and you understand that those incidences are continuing to increase, and you know, companies are just now becoming aware of the fact that they need to report, and they recognize that there has been a breach, right? Because a lot of them don't know unless the FBI comes and tells them. And the implementation of 171, right? So it will give companies an indication that they've been breached. They'll be able to see it. It's not going to, CMMC level 2 is not going to stop a state actor, right? You have to get to the CMMC level 3 to begin to block state actors from being able to take your stuff. But at least if you implement the requirements in the 171, you will be aware that you're getting hit. And that's one of the main things. You know, if you start looking at it from our perspective, and I guess as a taxpayer, you have to tell me what you feel, right? But if I'm spending millions of dollars on a technology, and in the process of that development, all my information, all my research, all my analysis gets taken, is it worth our while to continue going after that technology? Right? Or do we say, I'm sorry, it's been taken, it's compromised, it's no longer worth our while, and let it go? And so, you know, we in the department, a couple of things, right? It's not a quick process to do that, a damage assessment. It's not a quick process for us to get all the information. And unless we get the assistance and the help of our contractors to make those incident reports, figure out, right, how they got hit. And you know, that's another thing. As we progress through this, we have to do rulemaking for Rev 3, right? So we right now are in CMMC. Everybody has to align to the NIST 800-171 Rev 2. But they've already published Rev 3 of the NIST 800-171. So my team has published that final rule for CMMC, and guess what? We're already started working on the rulemaking to incorporate that Rev 3. So it's coming. That change is coming. The problem is that we have to go through a rulemaking process. So the good news for the DIB is we're not going to hit them with it day one. The bad news is we're always playing a game of catch up, right? Because our rulemaking process doesn't keep us at the pace of relevancy with the threat. So we are constantly losing that data. And, I laugh because one of these days I'm going to bring a recording of like America the Beautiful, or I'm proud to be an American or something, and have it play in the background as I get on my soapbox and I say, the Chinese have an aircraft that looks exactly like our F-35, right? They stole that in a 15-second download, and they replicated our airplane, right? Down to they didn't even bother to fix any of the things that we today see as a flaw in that aircraft. They just took it and made it, right? So now your son and my son go to war with somebody in China. My kid has to depend on his skill level and ability to come home to his mama, because he no longer has the best weapon system under his feet that can beat the adversary. And so from that perspective, we owe it to the men and women in uniform, those people who put their lives on the line for us to maintain the freedom and the lifestyle that we are accustomed to give them the best capability when they go into that armed conflict. And the fact that we're kind of lackadaisical and it's not really, oh, they don't really care about me. I'm just the ball bearing manufacturer. Yeah, but when you have that full tech data package, then you've got the keys to the kingdom. So, 2 rules of thumb. If you're the ball bearing guy and you only need the design of the ball bearing, don't let anybody send you the entire tech data package and let you figure out what you need. Make them just send you what you need. And if you do have the whole tech data package or the entire structural design of our aircraft, you need to protect it, because our sons and daughters are dependent on you to keep that secret so we don't go up against the exact same technology if we have to go into an armed conflict. Okay, now I'll get off my soapbox.
Understood. It's a stark example. I mean, and so obviously companies are looking for ways to comply, though. And you mentioned this cloud pilot through the Office of Small Business Programs. How will that work? How will that help folks comply? And I think you mentioned there are other pilots that are of similar vein.
Yes. So the Army has one that they're getting ready to start unloading people called ENCODE. I don't know. I think their first thought was they were going to do it on a first come, first serve basis for the initial pilot, right? So they may say we're going to have a universe of like 500 companies, and the first ones that sign up are the ones that we're going to test out this capability. There are still things, where we're building the airplane while we're flying it, and some of these pilots, because, some of the things about they will give you an environment. You'll have a virtual desktop. You won't be able to download the data onto your system, so it'll be protected in the cloud. So your CMMC requirements on your endpoints will be a little bit different, right, than if you did a full CMMC assessment in your spaces. Office of Small Business Programs is supposed to onboard their first 2 contractors in January, and then another 25 in February. I think they're looking at small businesses out of the Mentor Protege program or the SBIR programs. Now, the questions become, if I need to download any of that information to a printer or what have you, they're going to have to make sure that we have strict instructions and compliance for that. There'll probably be more of an assessment requirement in your endpoint if you're doing that, right? So, some of these pilots will defray the cost, but the pilots are just to prove out the concept, right? We've also had conversations. The Deputy Secretary of Defense has reached out to some of the large cloud providers to ask them, are you planning to do anything CMMC compliance wise? What is on the horizon for you? We really need to help our small businesses. We've had several interactions. their perspective is, depending on which provider you're talking to, is a little bit different how they're going to handle it and what they're going to do. But there is a move afoot across all of industry. There's a company that we met with that is putting together like a TurboTax questionnaire type way for you to build your system security plan, for you to build your insider threat policy. The NIST 800-171 has a lot of internal policy requirements in it, as well as compliance with requirements for your systems. And a lot of the small businesses are like, we can do the technical stuff. That's easy. It's writing those policies that are eating our lunch, right? So, there are innovative companies out there trying to help you with that. There are innovative companies that are out there trying to be a managed service provider. Now, the one thing out of the rule that, we got comments in the rule that, some of these managed service providers only handle security data that not necessarily rises to the level of CUI. So in one of the changes to the rule that we made out of public comment was, if you are an MSP or a cloud service provider that does not transmit, store, or process CUI, then you're not required to have a level 2 assessment. Great for them, right? Because it takes a lot of weight off of them, and they can probably provide service a little bit cheaper than if they had to be level 2 compliant. But the company buying them has to understand what they're buying and understand that that company cannot be within their boundary and store, process, or transmit CUI. So you've got to be very witting and understanding of the way you put your network together and how you manage it and where that CUI flows, and be able to make sure it's protected and covered, right? As well as if you need to flow any data down to subcontractors, you got to make sure they're prepared as well.
I want to get back to the CUI flow down, but first, Jen, I also wanted to ask you about the DIBCACs. You've been doing these joint surveillance assessments, and I think you're doing some further mock assessments this fall to get ready for CMMC. Can you talk us through a little bit about how those work and what you're learning so far, and kind of how you build up to the CMMC taking effect?
So I'm not quite sure what you mean by the mock assessments in the fall. We are continuing to do the joint surveillance assessments with the C3PAOs up until the effective date of the rule, right? Because at that point, the C3PAOs would be able to do the assessments themselves. So we have been doing those C3PAO assessments in their NIST SP 800-171 high assessments, but just in conjunction with the C3PAOs. So DCMA will continue to perform the NIST SP 800-171 high assessments ourselves once the rule is out. And that will still be based on DoD's priority contractors. In addition to, we will continue the mission of the CMMC level 2 assessments of the candidate C3PAOs in support of the rollout of CMMC. Additionally, DCMA is actively working towards developing CMMC level 3 assessment training and intend to have initial operational capability by Q2 of next year, with full operational capability for anyone. Now, of course, they will not have to have this because of the rollout, but if anyone chooses to be an early adopter of CMMC level 3, the DIBCAC plans to be prepared.
And yeah, returning to the CUI issue, I think there's been a lot of conversation around flow down of CUI through the supply chain. I think you mentioned you'd worked with the large contractors early on and then started going smaller. I mean, are there any takeaways in terms of how these contractors are handling CUI, the efficacy of their practices in terms of flowing things down through the supply chain that you think would be important to highlight as we prepare to implement CMMC?
In several of our industry groups and some of the offshoots of those industry groups, the more focused groups on specific issues, what we have found is that while we know that it's hard for DoD to label and accurately mark CUI, that's been a chronic issue through the years, right? Hopefully this will help. CMMC will force that train of thought, will force the acquisition workforce to be careful about what they are labeling. There's also a FAR CUI rule that is in the works, and hopefully it will come to light soon. That will help a little bit more and provide a little bit more detail on CUI identification for the workforce. But what we have really had as a takeaway from the big DIB, or from lots of the primes, is help us help our subs by telling us exactly what is CUI, and we need to be able to flow that down to the subs. Now, many of the primes have thousands of subs in their supply chain. The large ones have told me before, we are lucky if we know 3 tiers down the supply chain for some of our larger contracts, our larger programs. So I think that is really eye-opening for me. When I first started doing this, I was under the impression that everyone knew exactly what their supply chain looked like, right? Way down, very deep, especially with all the supply chain illumination tools that are out there. But that's just simply not the case, right? And helping to identify that information, we can do a better job from the department side by making sure that we identify, by making sure that we are working with those prime contractors to identify what is critical. And especially with CMMC having to identify various levels and assign various levels based on the type of CUI. And then that will surely help those prime contractors to be able to say this piece that goes down to this one, and so on and so forth down the supply chain needs this level. So Ms. Bostjanick, do you have any insight that you want to share about that? I know you guys have been actively working this for a long time.
So we are actively working memos and instructions and training for the DoD workforce as well as the contractor workforce. I think, one of the things that our expectations are that when a contract solicitation comes out, it's going to tell you what level of CUI is intended to be transmitted. Now, we fully intend that, when a contractor bids on a contract, they're going to kind of have to know so they can do their partnering arrangements with their subs, and they're going to have to know who's going to be able to receive that information. So 2 things. When you start talking about a solicitation with your prime, you need to have a meeting. You need to discuss the type of information that you need, and only the information that they need to do their part of the contract, right? If you are building the tires for the F-35, you don't necessarily have something that would be considered CUI. Don't let them package up the entire tech data package and send it to you until you figure out what you need out of this, which is what I think one of the main things that we found, right? And I used to be a contracting officer, so this is partially my fault because we negotiated out the extra hours for the CAD CAM guys back in the day. I mean, it's been years ago, right? We want to get the cheapest price. So no longer are we going to give you those hours to go cut those portions out. And so people got used to just sending the whole tech data package down the supply chain. Y'all figure it out. That's how come we have people that have airplanes that look just like ours today in other lands, because they got a hold of those tech data packages, right? Which tell you everything, how to build it, everything. So when you think about that as a supplier and a sub, you need to make sure you understand what data is being given to you, and you need to push back if you think they're giving you CUI that you don't need. I think another thing is if you are a development company that's doing analysis or research or doing some kind of technology development for the department, when you recognize that what you're putting together would eventually be something that would be controlled unclassified information and important to the program for and something that our adversaries would want, you need to let us know. So we handle it and we mark it appropriately. I would also make sure that, for the primes working with their program managers, challenge them, right? And say, where's the marking? Because that's one of the things that we've had problems with. And, one of the expectations is once CMMC comes around, either they won't mark anything and look the other way and be like, oh, I don't have any CUI, I'm good to go. Or they'll mark everything and then it'll be way too expensive. Nobody will be able to do it. We're going to have to put some cognitive thought in this, and we're going to have to understand the data that we have. And I think, just like with a lot of the requirements that have been put in place across the years for different reasons, that we fight it at first, but once we get into it and get used to it, it'll become second nature.
You mentioned there's some guidance coming. Is that what that's going to address? Is how programs are marking CUI, how they should be approaching this issue?
So we've got a couple of memos in the work. One's a leveling memo that says, hey, if your data is associated with this kind of thing, then it'll be a level 2. If it's associated with this kind of thing, it'd be a level 2 self-assessment. This would rise to level 3. And then we are working with DAU to provide training, right, to put together training courses for our program managers and contracting officers so they're aware and can understand what that is. So, but you know how that is. Some people pay attention, some people don't. And so, it's going to take a whole of ecosystem working together and challenging one another to say, hey, are you giving me something that really needs to be level 2? And maybe I don't want that if it's a CUI that's level 2. I don't think I need that to do my job. I mean, we've got to get away from the easy button, just send everything and figure it out, to no, I'm going to be deliberate about what I flow. And by virtue of the fact that they have to validate that, there's going to be some liability on the prime's part that, if you flowed information and didn't validate that they could handle it or were certified to handle it, then you're going to have a problem.
All right. Well, in the time we have left, and we've touched on this a bit throughout the conversation, but I'd love to turn to what the next couple of years look like. I know DoD has to finalize. Yeah, well, there you go. Breaking news. DoD has to finalize the proposed acquisition rule before this can take effect as part of the contracting process, but this could move pretty quickly next year. What is the expectation kind of in year one? I think that those first 12 months, it's mostly self-assessments, but folks could, is it that program offices could start including some level 2 requirements if they so chose?
Yes. So the one thing we didn't want to do was close the door on any ability to require a certification if we have a program that is important and high priority, and it definitely needs to make sure that their cyber concerns are covered. Then we've given them the opportunity to include it, right? And it's funny because you have people all across government, right? So some of the interactions that we had were like, you aren't going fast enough. You need to have this thing implemented totally in 6 months. And then you had other people like, whoa, you're going way too fast. You got to slow down. Our companies aren't ready. Right. So we tried to hit that sweet spot where we're giving people, I mean, come on, it's been almost 10 years with the 70-12 clause that people have been supposed to be looking at this and assessing themselves and being compliant. And so we're not going to give you another 10 years, but we are going to give you another year or so to kind of ease into it, to say, okay, this is really going to be, I can't wink, wink, nod, nod, tell you that I'm compliant anymore. Somebody's going to come look under the hood and make sure. So companies now have some runway to get themselves ready, to get themselves invested and get it working. It also gives the CMMC ecosystem, quite frankly, time to mature and be ready to roll as well. One of the problems, the good thing with taking the strategic pause is we've probably made the program better and made it more implementable for our companies. But the bad thing is a lot of people are like, yeah, it's not going to happen. I'll believe it when I see it. So a lot of people didn't jump into the water until now when that rule goes final. right? We still have companies that are still waiting to get into the ecosystem till after the 16th of December. So, we've got some time. We've got to mature the ecosystem. And, you and I both know we have our critics out there, and there are going to be issues that we're going to have to figure out and change, and things that we're going to have to tweak as we go along. Nothing's ever perfect, and nothing ever rolls out exactly the way you expect it to. So, that phased rollout approach gives us some latitude and some time to make sure that we are pushing and pulling in the right direction, because the main thing about this program is that we have to ensure the integrity of it, and that we maintain and preserve that competition amongst contractors, fair and open competition that we live and die by in our acquisition system.
Jen, I wanted to just give you a chance. Any final thoughts as DCMA moves toward implementation and its big piece of the CMMC program?
We're just excited to partner with DoD CIO and the CMMC Program Management Office. We have, since we have started in 2019 and laid the foundation, and as Ms. Bostjanick mentioned, my former boss, Mr. John Ellis, was one of the Tiger team members to basically get CMMC 2.0 to where it is now. So we have had a very good, strong partnership with DoD CIO in developing the CMMC program, and we're very vested, obviously, as a major stakeholder. We're a critical player in the CMMC program, and we're very vested in ensuring the success of CMMC, and excited to see what the next 6 months looks like for us. And not just the 6 months, but till full implementation and thereon. And Ms. Bostjanick's not allowed to retire.
Well, there you go, Stacy.
Well, I'll be having to come in on my scooter or my walker if I stay too much longer, Jen. I am getting old.
No, not at all.
Now, I still have a couple good years left in me. I won't be leaving anytime soon, but we do laugh about it. I think the PMO rulemaking is not easy or fun. It's not like a walk in the park. And so most of us in the program office have been doing this for a bit of time. So we do dream.
Hopefully the rulemaking process didn't shave too many years off of the lifetime, but I know it's been quite the hurdle. Well, that unfortunately is all the time we have for today. Again, I'd like to thank today's guests. Stacy Bostjanick is Chief of Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity and Deputy CIO for Cybersecurity at the Defense Department. And Jen Henderson is Senior Cybersecurity Policy Analyst at the Defense Contract Management Agency. Thank you both for your time.
Oh, thank you. You guys have
Absolutely.
a great day.
Thank you.
Again, I'm Justin Doubleday, and you're watching Federal News Network. Let me send you back to the studio for more on the Risk and Compliance Exchange.